There we go. There I am. Okay, we're gonna let people roll in here. Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Okay, folks are rolling in. And I'm gonna get started with my spiel. Okay, hi everybody. My name is Adam DesJardins. I'm the programs manager at CultureSource. And thanks for joining us today for our online program called Digital Archiving, Preserving Work, Saving Coin. So today, for those of you who might not be familiar with CultureSource, we are a regional arts service organization based in Southeast Michigan, working to serve the arts and cultural organizations and sector of Southeast Michigan. We do this work through three main pillars. One is programs and convenings, like this one that you're at, everything from professional development workshops to larger innovative programs highlighting speakers and thinkers and movers and shakers in arts and culture. We also do our work through funding, re-granting initiatives for both arts and cultural organizations and also individuals and artists and collectives to better support the arts and cultural sector in Southeast Michigan. And the last way we do our work at CultureSource is through research to better understand how and why and what's happening in arts and cultural sector and how we can be of better service and support to the arts and cultural sector. So that is a little bit more about CultureSource. Today, you are here for our Digital Access for the Arts program, which is a part of our work with the Rocket Community Fund. And we are having the third online program as a part of this 7-part series. And it is all about digital archiving, preserving work, and saving coin. Archiving and preservation are different things, I've learned, and we will do a deep dive into that. So a little bit more about our digital access for the arts program. So right now you're at part 1 of the 4-part digital access for the arts program. So we are having a 7-part online program series, which features local, national, international speakers and presenters, really detailing, what's up in their world as, arts and culture work shifts online. And so this is the 3rd program as a part of this series. If you have missed the other 2 so far, what you can do is you can go to culturesource.org /calendar and kind of backtrack in our calendar and watch the previous recordings. So that's where we'll be putting the previous recordings from these programs, is where in the button where you registered for this program. The second part of our digital access for the arts program is our funding initiative. We are funding 16 $5,000 grants for CultureSource members to make investments in sustainable technologies that enhance their digital and online work. This application is due on Monday, on March 1st at 5 p.m. So check it out. And my colleague Penny Maria will be dropping the link in the chat too. Starting soon, hopefully next week, is our Tech Experts in Residence opportunities, which is a service for one-on-one support in digital strategy, ideation, and innovation. These are really meetings with tech expert in residence, not so much to troubleshoot and think about, how do I use Zoom or how do I do an online gallery, but more so, here's somebody who knows and understands arts and cultural organizations, understands technology, and can help you innovate and really think about the strategy of your digital work online. So more, why would you want to do the online gallery? I'm really excited to be launching that service pretty soon here too. And then what just launched is our research initiative with 8 Bridges Workshop, who did a really great survey of tech and arts folks in working throughout the nation, funded by the National Endowment for the Arts and the Ford Foundation and the Knight Foundation, to better understand what the needs are of artists who work at the intersection of technology and art making. So they have lots of expertise in the whole tech and arts realm, and we're excited to be working with them on some research that we're doing to better assess the current digital and online capacities and infrastructure of CultureSource member organizations, just so that we can better understand how to support the arts and cultural sector in their work online, currently in this moment in the pandemic, but then also far into the future, because we really recognize that online arts and culture work is here to stay. So that is our Digital Access with Arts program. It is all in partnership with Rocket Community Fund. They have been really great partners at the community sponsorships team. And so we're really grateful for their support for this whole program and really in helping us co-think it and design it and launch it as well. So huge shout out to the folks at Rocket Community Fund for their support on this program. Some upcoming programs that we have. Next week on Thursday, we'll be doing a program with the National Assembly of State Arts Agencies on a guide that they recently released on new findings on arts advocacy, how to talk about public funding. This will be just a really quick 30-minute program about how you can basically take tips and tricks for talking about public funding, which has been really essential these days, and how to talk about that with folks bipartisanly too, who are public officials and public servants. You know, we have really had to do a lot of advocacy work for PPP loans and for state support and for federal support. So this should be a really interesting program that just dives into how to do better in our messaging for arts advocacy. Then following that program, we'll be doing a data briefing on what audiences want, which is basically an update from the COVID-19 Audience Outlook Monitor. This is research that has been happening locally, nationally, and internationally with Wolf Brown. And we're really excited to be having regular data briefings for CultureSource members. And we'll be doing the first of the year, which will reflect on the February data next week. Basically, the whole Audience Outlook Monitor research is to really better understand where audiences are currently in thinking about attending in-person arts programming and going back to theaters and museums, and it's just really helpful intel. And then Thursday, March 18th, we'll be doing our fourth Digital Access for the Arts program, online program, which will really be a deep dive into what arts education looks like online right now. We know a lot of arts and cultural organizations have extensive arts education programs, whether it be for older adults, whether it be for K-12. And so we'll be really looking into what certain national partners have been doing at the Kennedy Center, at Carnegie Hall, at Mural Arts Philadelphia in terms of their after-school programs and summer camps, and really thinking through arts education instruction online. This will also be in partnership with MAIA, which is the Michigan Arts Education Instruction and Assessment Initiative. They're really great folks. So excited to be partnering with them on that program on March 18th. And then lastly, save the date for our spring biennial member meeting, which will be happening online on Wednesday, March 24th. From 1 to 3 p.m. We have some really exciting speakers lined up. So save the date for that. Of note, our funding opportunity that I mentioned earlier for our Digital Access for the Arts program, the applications are due on Monday, March 1st at 5 p.m. So check that out. And then if you know any artists locally or anywhere really in the United States, the 2022 Creative Capital Awards are open. This is a really great opportunity administered through Creative Capital based in New York, which is funding for artists for new projects, as well as, you know, they do a lot of career support and networking in tandem with that award too. So it's a really great professional development opportunity for artists too. Also on our program today, we have Yen Azaro. Again, she is really a wonderful person to have joining us, and we'll be graphic recording this program. Yen is an artist and activist and graphic recorder based in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and we're just really excited to have her here again to make our programs a little more visual and artistic and less just Brady Bunch heads talking on the screen. A huge thank you to our partners. There are very many of them, and we are very thankful for their support in helping us support the sector, the arts and cultural sector here in Southeast Michigan. So huge shout out to them and their support and partnership on our work. And without further ado, we are going to get started with today's program. I'm really excited to learn more. I've been nerding out about this as I've been speaking with all the different presenters about this program, and I'm just excited to see, you know, where this exploratory conversation leads us in terms of learning more about digital archiving and preservation and what that means for organizations currently and into the future, and where and how these folks are thinking about the work and doing it currently. So we'll be joined by Brian Wilson from the Henry Ford, Chelsea Denault, who runs the Michigan Digital Preservation Network, and Jonah Raduns-Silverstein from Detroit Sound Conservancy. So I'm really excited to pass it over to them for their presentations, and then following those, we will go into a bigger conversation. So make sure to save your questions and use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brian, who will lead us in our first presentation.
Thank you very much, Adam. Let me make sure I'm sharing my screen. Hopefully y'all can see that. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Brian Wilson. I'm the Senior Manager of the Archives and Library at the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan. I've been with the Henry Ford since 2010, working on digital and physical materials and collections in our archive. I want to today to contribute to the discussion by reviewing the history of digital activities at the Henry Ford, where we started, how we've gotten to where we are today, and where we're headed in the future. I'm hoping that perhaps you can see yourself reflected at some point or points through the telling of our digital path. As a way to encompass not only archiving and preservation activities, but other digital work as well, I'm going to use the term digital curation throughout my talk. And so what is digital curation? Definitions of digital curation incorporate not only processes associated with archiving and preservation, but also selection and the adding of value to those digital assets over time. Curation is also a term often associated with museums and museum work. And so as an archivist within a museum, it's a term that can help me in relating to my museum colleagues. This is a brief snapshot of the Henry Ford as it is today and as it relates to digital stuff. The majority of our digital activities are focused on digitization or replication of our physical objects, as is indicated by the staff counts there. Not all of our digitization or preservation staff live in the same department or even unit, and there are a number of different roles or functions being performed, such as cataloging, imaging, web uploads, and so forth. So it's easiest to list staff counts as number of folks on email lists, as I've done here. And although I've indicated that there are 3 to 4 staff on the digital preservation email chain, we don't currently have a dedicated digital preservation person, and is often myself taking that role. I gather and organize the materials, and IT supplies the storage infrastructure and the resource to manage and maintain those that material. Much of the current storage volume I've listed there is committed to replications and not original digital collection objects, and also to legacy AV digitization, which I'll talk about in a minute. So where did we start out from? We've been working with digital materials in our collections since the early 1990s. First with analog to digital image on disc media in the 1990s. That was laser discs and then photo CD media. We established a website in 1995. We switched to direct imaging with flatbed scanners in the early 2000s, and then moved all of our museum photography to digital methods and tools in the mid 2000s. And we began to do an extensive amount of audio and moving image digitization in the mid 2000s as well. Using all of that digital material, we created a number of collection sites, again, during those mid 2000s, generally in partnership with other organizations such as U of M Dearborn and Wayne State. As the list implies, much of the work was focused on digitization and presentation of materials. However, in this period, we did begin some amount of digital collecting through the establishment of a web archiving program, capturing the website of Ford Motor Company and later our own site, and that work continues to this day. Reaching the period of 2009 to 2012, we undertook several large initiatives driven by an institutional priority placed on digitization of the entirety of our holdings. So a very big goal. In the archives, we instituted a digital camera imaging workflow to supplement our existing flatbed workflow as a way to increase our production. Our collections management system was replaced with a newer system that made increased use of digital assets we were producing. And we redesigned our website, adding a far more robust digital collections component to provide wider access to all those digital assets we were creating. These initiatives resulted in a rapid increase in the production of digital materials and put increased pressure on the use of and improvements to our network storage. We also did a good deal of digital triage in this time period, as well as risk assessment, primarily to address some really super sketchy storage conditions that put many of our digital assets at real risk. Issues like the hard drive nest, shown here, that held a great deal of legacy digitized moving image and audio material. So trying to get all of that material onto network drives and make sure that it was properly backed up. And like the sudden issues like the sudden and complete failure of one of our network attached storage devices that we suffered during this period, and which caused a temporary loss of access to several terabytes of legacy imaging data. These issues and incidents help drive home for us the point that digital preservation is needed not only from a need to maintain archival provenance and data authenticity, but to maintain the large investment in labor that we have in some of those replication images and films and audio, saving our coin, as noted in the session title. These situations also help to spur development of a digital preservation policy, complementing our existing physical object preservation policy and providing institutional support for the triage efforts. I'll also add that we were greatly aided in the policy development process by a graduate student intern. So do keep in mind that we are very fortunate here in Southeast Michigan to have two outstanding information schools that are always looking for opportunities for their students. Entering the later part of the 2010s, we spent considerable time to develop and refine our digitization workflow. We've become pretty good at creating digital stuff, and it is, again, the largest of our digital activities. We actually saw a leveling off of our imaging production volume in this period, resulting from both our narrative-driven selection process and from constraints on labor resource. At the same time, though, we began to collect more original digital materials, digital collection items, rather than replications of our physical collections. And we continue to improve network storage in terms of hardware and capacity. So by the end of the 2010s, we are dealing with a number of sources of digital materials, largely divided into two groups: those created through ongoing activities, listed there, and those materials considered to be legacy data. And what I consider to be legacy data covers all the above ongoing activities that preceded the mid-2000s. And it includes this gem of a box from our archives, which contains not only 8-inch floppies, but also 5 1/4-inch floppies and 3 1/2-inch floppies. So it's both a physical and digital archiving challenge, and often represents what our issues are with our legacy data. So now we arrive at the present day. 2020 saw us rely heavily on our past digital curation work as we drew assets to support programming overall, including several months of digital-only programming in the middle of the year, with those assets used across all of our digital outlets: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, our blog, email blasts, and so on. We also greatly increased our use and experience with digital tools and methods, both in everyday work and in collecting. For this year, 2021, on a practical front, I will be working to separate our storage of digital collection objects from the storage of our replications. Along with that will come development of specific procedures for those collection objects to better ensure their authenticity, originality, privacy, and security. At a policy level, we will be revising our overarching institutional collections policy, which I anticipate will provide additional support for our digital curation activities. Looking ahead to 2022 and then beyond, I expect to see an increasing volume of digital collection objects, which will put focus on our curation work, and an increasing amount of in-house produced high-definition video, which will test our storage capabilities. Our institution will celebrate its 100th anniversary in 2029, and I expect us to draw heavily from our own records, both physical and digital, to support that programming. We are also discussing further improvements to access, particularly in regards to copyrighted works such as film, and with regards to text and improved searching for textual records from our holdings. And of course, we'll be working on issues involving staff for our digital activities, as well as continued education for our data creators, folks who handle that data, and users about digital materials. So rather than best practices, I've decided to convey just a few of my takeaways from my nearly 11 years of working at the Henry Ford on digital things. First, technology, as we know, is constantly moving and changing. That means that digital curation and all the activities under its umbrella are active and continuous processes. Making even small improvements in understanding the materials that you have in their storage or backup conditions and in access to them are all beneficial. Use of digital assets or the inability to use those assets can both promote the value of preservation to your organization. Do seek out those U of M students and Wayne State students for your projects. They can be enormously helpful. And the active and continuous nature of digital processes just heightens the value of collaboration and networking. And so finally, in that spirit, I want to offer one last practical digital curation, digital archiving, digital preservation, and all things digital takeaway. And that is to encourage you to check out the Mid-Michigan Digital Practitioners Group, which despite their name draws folks from across the state working in a variety of organizations on all manner of digital and digitally related projects, some of the many with a great deal of experience and some just starting out. And bonus, if you join the listserv, you'll be put on the distribution of the Directory of Experts list, which contains names, contact info, skills, and expertise for 20 to 30 people from around the state ready and willing to answer your questions. And I'll throw that link in the chat after I'm done. Thank you very much.
Sweet, thank you, Brian. Really appreciate it. We're gonna move over, I have some questions, but we're gonna move it over to Chelsea next. So again, folks, if you have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end of the program or when we open it up for conversation and whatnot. Chelsea, the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you so much, Adam. Hi, everyone. I'm Chelsea Denault. I am with the Michigan Digital Preservation Network. Let me get my screen shared. All right. So what is digital preservation? An introduction to the Michigan Digital Preservation Network. So what is digital preservation? So one of the best ways to think about it is this interaction between management of digital content using technology. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So here's another great definition. Digital preservation is the series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary. And this comes to us from the Digital Preservation Handbook, which I think folks are going to drop a link to in the chat there. So managed activities, what does that mean? Digital preservation requires a lot of actions to be done in order to be proactive and systematic about how we approach tasks and issues. And this is a really helpful way to think about digital preservation, like what Brian was saying, as an ongoing process and not a one-off technical solution. Activities can include things like fixity checking, so making sure that your files, as they're being stored on your hard drives, are not changing in any way, that there's no bit rot happening, for instance. Actions can also include things like characterization, so figuring out what kind of file formats you even have that need to be put under preservation. And then virus checking, which is a really important part of ongoing preservation efforts. That second part, continued access. This is really the ultimate aim of digital preservation, is maintaining access and usability. One of my colleagues from Penn State likes to say that preservation without usability is just hoarding. And so it's really important to remember that if we want to preserve our digital content, we should be able to use it so that it's actually practical. And the third part is digital materials. Of course, we're talking about preserving digital materials. And I really appreciate Brian's distinction between replicated materials, so digital manifestations of physical objects, versus born digital materials. And then finally, that last part, that as long as necessary. So this is a reminder that we should be aiming to preserve digital content for as long as necessary. And that really does depend. For cultural memory institutions, we like to think that that's in perpetuity, right? That's digital preservation forever, so that we're maintaining our cultural memory collections. And I also just really love this definition from Trevor Owens at the Library of Congress. Ultimately, the craft of digital preservation is an ongoing dialogue between the affordances of media, the intentions of creators and curators, and the institutional commitments and resources that enable preservation. Digital preservation is not about a particular system or a series of actions. It's about preparing content and collections for the first in a great chain of handoffs. And I think this really speaks to what we do as archivists and collectors at cultural memory institutions, right? We are merely stewards of these collections for future generations. And that goes for digital collections as well. I'm sure you're all like, wow, that's great, but why should I care about digital preservation? So preservation is part of good collection stewardship. You know, we care for our physical materials, and we should also care for our digital materials and make sure that they are secure and protected. Sometimes we have legal requirements for keeping digital materials safe and secure. And you know, whether that's documentation related to your organization, or whether that's some kind of donor agreement that you have with a donor for a particular artifact. So this is a really important consideration as well. The digital pivot, I'm sure everyone is groaning, oh, if I hear the word pivot again, I'm gonna scream. But digital preservation right now is a really important thing as we all transitioned during the pandemic to digital outreach and digital collections in order to continue interacting with our audiences, even while we were all stuck at home. So now we have, you know, much more digital content that we need to think about preserving for long-term usability. Also think of digital preservation as an insurance policy of sorts. Lisa Brisson at the Michigan Museum Association, she and I like to think about digital preservation as an insurance policy, especially in regards to the many disasters that can happen at our institutions. You know, we never like to think that there could be a fire or a flood, but Lisa and I, the first time we met was right after the massive flood in Midland, and many museums in Midland lost so many important cultural artifacts. And so this is a really important consideration, especially given climate change and all of the hazards that come along with that to our buildings and our places and our collections. And then finally, and I think Brian did a great job in emphasizing this, digital preservation is really about protecting the investments that you've already made, both in time, but also in money. Digitization is very expensive. It's not cheap. And so making sure that you're protecting the digitized assets that you already have, so that you don't lose them to bit rot, so that you don't lose them to a virus. This is very, or like Brian said, you lose them to a massive hard drive failure. These are all really important considerations about when you're thinking about why digital preservation is important. But there are some challenges to digital preservation, mostly cost. It's storage, especially digital storage is not always cheap. And then expertise. Digital preservation does require a bit of technical skill, more so than maybe using Dropbox or saving files to your computer. Because it has a lot of very specific kinds of actions that keep data secure, it does require a bit more expertise than your average digital service. This presentation is about saving coin, so I did want to include a series of free resources. And I think these will be dropped in the chat. I did share them with Adam, so whether they're shared now or later, you will have access to them. So the first one is the National Digital Stewardship Alliance Levels of Digital Preservation, which I have here to the right. This is a really great assessment and benchmarking tool to figure out both where you're at as an institution in your digital preservation program, but also where you might want to be. So you might say, well, we're at a level 2 on storage, but we would like to be a level 4. And then you can plan for what resources might we need to get to a level 4. So it's a really great, useful and free tool. There's also the community-owned preservation tool registry, which features a lot of great free open source tools for all sorts of preservation actions, from ingest to fixity checking to characterization. And these do require a bit of technical skill, like I said, but they are free. And it's easy to download them to your systems and to play around with them and learn how to do these kinds of actions. It's also a great opportunity to reach out to your folks in IT and build those relationships. The Digital Preservation Outreach and Education Network offers a running list of some free, but also some paid training opportunities in digital preservation and digital archiving and curation. The Software Preservation Network offers a new project called Emulation as a Service infrastructure, which it's complicated, so I won't get into it too much, but it allows you to run old software or to open old files using old software. For instance, like a Windows 95 Word text file. If you put that into your computer now, your computer will say, I don't know what that is. So Easy from the Software Preservation Network allows you to create a environment of an old computer on your new computer, which is really useful. And then finally, the Michigan Digital Preservation Network. We offer a series of free resources that will be rolling out throughout the rest of this year, which I will talk a little bit more about later on. So what is the Michigan Digital Preservation Network? We are a new nonprofit organization funded by the Library of Michigan through a grant from the Institute for Museum and Library Services, and managed by the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services. And a little bit of background about us. So we emerged from the 2019 statewide and regional stepping stones to the National Digital Platform, a very long title. Usually we just call it the Stepping Stones Project. And this project was really cutting edge in that it focused less on technical solutions to distributed digital preservation and more on collaboration, relationship building, and resource sharing. It prioritized bridging the gap between museums, archives, libraries, and historical societies. And the key deliverable from this project was a collaboration toolkit that laid out ways that MDPN could leverage some of the previous work by other similar institutions across the state. So our mission is to protect and manage digital cultural heritage materials through a distributed digital preservation model and to foster a community of digital preservation practitioners from collecting institutions across the state. That's a big mouthful. And so just to kind of pull out what's important out of that and the particular advantages that the MDPN features, we are collaborative. So we're focused on building a community among members to solve digital preservation problems. So leveraging the expertise of folks across the state, including the Mid-Michigan Digital Practitioners Group that Brian mentioned. They've been a great resource for us so far. The MDPN is also smart. We leverage collaborations that already exist in the state, allowing institutions, especially small museums, historical societies, archives across the state, to leapfrog some of the expertise and cost barriers to digital preservation. We're collective, so by distributing the costs of digital preservation across all of our members, digital preservation becomes less expensive for everyone, and in that way is more sustainable for all sorts of organizations overall. It's community-based, so members maintain control over their collections and the MDPN itself through member-centered governance structures. And then finally, it's equitable. And this is something we've prioritized from the very beginning. We assure that both small and large institutions feel like they have a voice in the MDPN and have equal access to digital preservation services. And like I said in the previous slide, we have tried to leverage a lot of the great partners and organizations that already exist across the state to build bridges and connections between folks. And so, as I said, we're funded by the Library of Michigan and IMLS, and we've been working very closely with the Michigan Archival Association, the Michigan Museums Association, the Historical Society of Michigan, and Michigan Humanities, and of course, CultureSource. And so it's been a much easier time to get off the ground, so to speak, by having such invested partners. Ways you can keep up with the MDPN. We have a website, mypres.org. You can also sign up for our mailing list. And you can follow us on Twitter. I tend to post jobs, grant opportunities, and other ways that you can get involved with the MDPN. So what's next for us? We are going to continue having our monthly committee meetings of the membership, governance, and technology committees. We, as I said, will be rolling out monthly education and advocacy resources for members, most of which will be free, some of which will be for members only. Most of the member-only resources, though, will come after we release our member pricing in June of this year at our membership summit, which will take place in June of 2021. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be engaging on a number of technical collaborations, both here in Michigan, working on with different tools, especially with small organizations through the Historical Society of Michigan. But we're also in the process of collaborating with some technical networks here in the United States, but also in Europe, to talk a little bit more about ways to make digital preservation processes easier for folks who might not have robust technical skills. And we're continuing to share knowledge, make connections, and build bridges with organizations across the state. So how can you get involved? Feel free to email me if you are interested at all in joining one of our committees. So that's membership, governance, and technology. Share information about the MDPN within your networks. I'm sure there's plenty of folks who I'm not connected with and who you are connected with who might be interested in joining the MDPN or at least talking about the challenges of digital preservation within a community. You can help shape our upcoming membership summit. Feel free to contact me if you are interested in that. Advocate for digital preservation in your organization. So this is going to be the first of our free resources that we're rolling out on our website at the end of this month, which is coming up very soon, where we'll lay out a number of different strategies and ideas for bringing digital preservation into your organization and building consensus for digital preservation with your board, with your executive directors, your deans, and with your IT colleagues. Communication and building a team is a very important part of digital preservation. It's very hard to do it alone. Volunteer for one of our technology pilots. If you're an organization that has digital assets and you want to learn more about digital preservation, feel free to reach out to me. We're always happy to talk a little bit about how you might fit in with some of our technology pilots. Give us a soapbox. If you have a blog or a webinar series like CultureSource, or if you have a newsletter that you send out to your members, invite us to write an article or to share information about digital preservation so that the folks who you connect with can know more about this important issue. And then finally, join our mailing lists or follow us on Twitter. And that's all. Thank you so much.
Sweet, thank you, Chelsea. To pass it over to Jonah. And Chelsea, if you could drop your email in the chat, that would be great. I'm sure there's some folks who would be interested in reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Hello, everybody. We can hear me, I hope. So my name is Jonah Raduns-Silverstein. I am the Deputy Director and Projects Manager at Detroit Sound Conservancy. We are a nonprofit, community-based music archive documenting, advocating for, and preserving Detroit music history. And Adam, I want to congratulate you because I think you did a really good job curating this panel, because now we really feel like the case study in, I think, what both Brian and Chelsea have been referring to. So we're a newer organization. We officially became a nonprofit in 2015, but advocacy kind of around different issues of music and music preservation we've been working on since about 2011, not to mention what all of our board members and advisors and volunteers have been doing their whole life. So I'm going to kind of just walk everybody through what it is we're doing and the crossroads we're at right now, because we are at a very exciting time. In some ways, of course, the pandemic has impacted us like everybody else in a lot of pretty difficult and tragic ways, but in other ways, it's opened up some doors for us as far as being able to look inward and think about how we want to build going forward. So I'm going to just kind of walk everybody through some touchstones on our website here, which is kind of this past year where we've been focusing a lot of getting our work to a solid place where we can launch off from as far as how we are engaging our community and audience digitally and working with our collections. So one of the earliest projects we did as an organization was an oral history project. So this was even before we were a nonprofit. But I want to kind of give a sense that basically before this year, much if not all of our programming has been, of course, in person and very kind of person-to-person grounded. And even all of these oral histories, of course, they were all taking place in person and not over Zoom or over the phone. We have been running annual conferences on Detroit music and Detroit sound. This past year, we opted not to do one digitally, and I think kind of going forward, we will of course reconsider that. But again, all grounded in in-person experiences, taking history and music history and bringing it into the present for audiences. So our prime example of that is the Bluebird stage. So the Bluebird Inn, which I'll talk about a little later, was a jazz club over on Detroit's Old West Side on Tyreman. And we now own the building and are working to restore it and rehabilitate it and turn it into our own headquarters archive music venue. But a perfect example of programming that takes history and recontextualizes it for the present is the Bluebird stage, which is this stage right here, as you can see in the Detroit Public Library, the big room upstairs, where the stage has traveled around all around Southeast Michigan, has been to France, was up to Toronto, and but all emphasizing kind of in-person performance and experience, recontextualizing history in this way. So another example of kind of this programming that I'm referring to, at the beginning of 2019, we held an exhibition at the Detroit Historical Museum, where the stage was focused, as well as kind of an exhibition of all of the work we had done up until this point. And I think what I want to kind of highlight here is that as a grassroots community-based organization, even though we're just starting out, we have been trying to work and set up our archive and how we're presenting our collections in a way that not only works sustainably in the way that I think Chelsea and Brian have been alluding to from their perspectives, but also in a way that deeply engages community. And we were incredibly proud of the exhibition we were able to put together at the Historical Museum. So you can see artifacts here, which I'll get to, sound system from a place called Club Heaven. And this was, again, I think we're really talking about physical in-person experiences that we've now had to internalize and say, okay, now how does that look digitally? So for us, how that's looked digitally up until this point is our artifacts that feature on our website. So essentially everything that you see here in this exhibition is now digitally accessible on our website. So over the course of this past year, the work that we and our volunteers and our community have been doing has been essentially, without digitizing any more material from our collections, basically looking at what we already have digitally and saying, okay, let's get that to a point where we feel comfortable and we feel like it's presented appropriately and well. And over the past year, kind of still considering our early stages of developing our archive, in many ways kind of having a pause in public programming, public in-person programming allowed us to turn around and solidify what we have already. So I encourage everybody to kind of scroll through here if this is of interest. I think what I kind of want to highlight here is a bit of the work that we have done in this past year, as far as what that means when I say getting our materials together. Because, you know, up until as kind of a community, I'm trying to get these tabs here. Okay. As a community-based archive, a lot of our work, in addition to grounding in these physical experiences, a lot of our work has been related to and with our social media. And I think some of the reflection we've been working on recently has been, well, how do we take a moment and say, okay, as we're building up the infrastructure of our archive, how do we potentially move a little more slowly to make sure that we're not getting ahead of ourselves as far as putting out all the content and not doing the due diligence that is kind of required of a stable, sustainable archive. So the way that this kind of has worked is over the past year, our digital repositories and the way that we showcase our work is very much grounded in kind of publicly accessible spaces. So this has been SoundCloud for audio, YouTube for video, Flickr for photography. And now looking back at kind of our website, for us, it's been about getting parity. So saying, okay, what is on our YouTube? What's on our SoundCloud? What have we put up over the years in these other places? And making sure that what we are presenting on our website and how we are putting together this public-facing digital repository is everything that is showcased on any one of these other repositories has the equal and opposite reflection within our website. So I encourage, if this is of interest, to kind of dive in and learn a bit about Detroit music history. So now, what has been most exciting for us as a small community-based organization is we recently were granted a substantial grant from the Mellon Foundation to now do the real work of establishing our archive in a meaningful way that is accessible. So this is a 2-year grant from the Mellon Foundation, and it's focusing on 3 largely hidden audio-visual collections that we are now charged with making accessible. So those 3, and these are all collections that we have deep connection to with community and with the musicians and producers and kind of everybody involved in these communities. So these 3 collections are United Sound Systems, which is a studio right over here in Midtown on 2nd Ave, where Parliament Funkadelic and the first Motown records were recorded. And we've done a lot of work advocating for the history and advocating for the physical building itself. The second collection here is the Club Heaven Sound System. This was a club over 6 Mile, right around Palmer Park, very seminal venue for the development of global dance music, house and techno. And the last collection here is the Greystone Jazz Museum, which was a museum that in, I believe it was 2015, 2016, before the building that it was in, which is the Book Tower, was going to be renovated, we were brought in and salvaged the materials. And now we are hoping to represent those to the community and to the world. So we're at a very exciting moment because we are kind of going from what feels a bit more grassroots to something that can be sustainable and long-term. And much of that for us is still volunteer driven. And we're at a very exciting point of figuring out how to, and Brian was referring to this as far as the School of Information that are in the area. And that is very evident to us. So after we made our grant announcement, we got upwards of 20 to 30 inquiries to volunteer, many of whom were practicing librarians or archivists, and kind of working as a community-based archive, really thinking about how, particularly now in the digital realm, how to be able to leverage that sort of interest and that sort of support in a way that continues to be safe and continues to promote social distancing, and how to set up workflows where, of course, as you're digitizing material, those are physical in-person experiences, but how can we set up almost a hybrid program where folks can do that from home, or what work can be done from home, what work can be done in person, and all the while kind of starting from the ground up with this and really trying to internalize lessons that Brian and Chelsea and other experts and experienced professionals are able to share, that make sure we potentially don't make the same mistakes that others have made, or just make sure that we are coordinating an effort that is sustainable and in for the long haul. So speaking of the long haul, kind of where this all ends is now thinking about how do we take, and this is in some ways one of the benefits of kind of having a little time to reflect, is our hope is to bring the archive and the collection to the Bluebird Inn on Tireman. It needs a complete renovation, a complete rehabilitation, but it's also an amazing opportunity to build a community space and archive from the ground up. And so thinking about innovative ways to demonstrate and showcase material and how that engages with community. And so we are actively working. We have a capital campaign that's just lifting off now. I think Adam might be putting that in the chat, but if you're interested in supporting, you can go to our website, detroitsound.org/give. And if you're interested in getting involved further, like I said, we are actively recruiting and building out our volunteer program, and we have kind of many ways to get involved here. detroitsound.org/volunteer, and there's a sign up form here at the bottom. I think that's a good recap for now.
Sweet, thanks so much, Jonah. And now I'm going to welcome everybody back that we've been hearing from, as well as Yana Zaro, who's our graphic recorder for the program. And we'll just make it a little bit more visually, we'll see what she's been up to, but then also, see something other than our faces, even though everybody's got a beautiful look today. I think you all can kind of see the layout of the screen as I have it, but if you do want to see more of Yen or you want to see more of us, you can use this little like gray line in between the videos and where Yen is to the left to adjust. So you can either make me and Jonah, Chelsea, and Brian smaller, or you can make us bigger. So feel free to toggle with that too. I just like to encourage people to do that. Thank you, everybody, for your presentations. I mean, obviously, there's so much involved in all of y'all's work, and I think there's lots of different angles in which to approach it too. There's systems design and creation, and there's the future, but then there's also the past, and there's also like, oh, we're working in the middle in the present right now and trying to make it work. And so I guess my first question is really kind of about this point of advocacy and messaging that I think you all kind of touched on in different ways. I mean, Chelsea, you talked about it with advocate for digital preservation at your organization. And Jonah and Brian, that's literally your work. That's like what you do every day. You're like, my job is just actually being an advocate and doing the work of digital preservation. But I'm wondering, from both internally and externally, and maybe this is a question for Brian and Jonah, but how have you done the advocacy work or the messaging around why your work is important, why taking digital preservation seriously is, of importance both internally to staff that might not know, or board members who might really, not know much, but then also externally to the public too, to advocate for your work at large as well. I'm just wondering, in thinking about how you message and how you advocate, what's your usual go-to or why, as it pertains to digital preservation specifically and the work that you all are doing, more online?
Good question. So for me, it's hard to separate. I know we're talking about digital preservation here, but for me, it's hard to separate the preservation of our digital materials from our physical materials. So I'm going to kind of wrap those together. I don't necessarily have a preservation sales pitch. I think what we've been able to do over the last few years is make our materials more usable and increase the use of them, which then supports the programming that we do that, throughout the rest of the institution. And then that drives back providing more material. And so we get this sort of virtuous cycle, if you will, of use and use driving us to make more materials available and so forth. And the second part would be us in the archive, as well as the library, understanding more about our collections and what we have, and making better tools available for ourselves, so that when someone asks a question or wants an asset or is exploring a topic, we can provide them with more information because we have a better understanding of our collections. And so in that way, again, we get into this cycle of being able to provide material that spurs more questions, to provide more material and so forth. So I think that's how we've been approaching that.
Well, I think from our end, there's kind of two, when thinking about advocacy, kind of in terms of our mission, our work. Fortunately, kind of our board, we don't, I never find myself having to kind of convince the board that this is the work. I find myself having to work to convince the board of many other things, but that we need to kind of continue to be an archive, we know that. But when I think about advocacy, there's kind of two lanes that we find ourselves having to work in as far as, and they end up at the same place, but they kind of come from different angles. So there's one side of advocacy where people just don't really know what the value would be in the stuff, basically. And that can come, and kind of the main point of focus that I come to, and this isn't as much a digital thing, but the United Sound Systems, the studio we were talking about, kind of our main focal point of advocacy around that has been making sure it doesn't get demolished. I mean, Michigan Department of Transportation now owns the building. They wanted to build a service drive. Doesn't seem like they're going to demolish it. They may try to move it, but there's this level of articulating what is the point of keeping things. And then the other side of advocacy that we find, that I think we're actively working on figuring out a language to get to, is because our work is in the city is a very personal one. I mean, people's material and their work is held very dear and personal to them. And particularly musicians, like I'm a musician too, can be very skeptical of why people would be interested in their stuff. Well, what do you want to do with it? Are you going to make money off of it? Like, why do you want it? And I think this articulating terms of advocacy and advocating for preservation as a practice, and why it not only benefits the person or the estate or the family, but why it benefits the public at large. And I think for us too, it's about drawing this line between like the stuff and the preservation of the stuff with like the intellectual property and the rights to the songs or the concert footage or whatever, and kind of this fine line of understanding, well, what value can we add as far as preserving the material and making them accessible, while also not like just taking all the resources out of and leaving the people or the family of the states with nothing. So I think when I think about advocacy, that's what comes to
Love it. Thanks for those responses. Chelsea, is there something you wanted to chime in too, or?
Yeah, there's two things. One thing that Brian said really got my mind going. And that's knowing what you have. It's so hard to advocate for your collections if you don't know what you have to advocate for. And so one of the things that we're trying to organize for our May educational resource is a digital, a class on building a digital asset register, right? Which lists not only all of your digital collections, but where they're at, what kind of file format they're in. It's a really useful tool to then bring to your board or to your executive director to say, like, look at all of the amazing digital resources that we have. We need to invest in protecting these for the long term. And then the thing that Jonah said about advocacy is building trust. And that's been something that has been really important for us as we build partnerships with organizations across the state. We never want to be perceived as kind of like the new hip organization, coming in and swooping in to steal everyone's thunder and to, brush away the good work that everyone else has been doing. And so it's been a real essential part of our advocacy for our mission to continue building trust with different kinds of communities, especially historical societies who, it's really interesting what Jonah said about musicians not, kind of questioning like, well, what are you going to do with these collections? Because we get the same thing from small historical societies who think that putting their often, not always, but often think that putting their digital assets out into the world means that fewer people might come to their organization. Or, they're like, what are people going to do with them once all of our assets are online? And so it's a process of building trust among all of our different stakeholders.
Yeah, that's a great point, Chelsea, too, especially given, the complicated history of preservation and collections and archiving too. That's a really interesting point. I think you all kind of answered my next question, which was going to be about, I think there's lots of folks here who are from smaller organizations or smaller historical societies, or even folks who might not, or might be from bigger institutions who might not have embarked upon this work too. And I'm just wondering, if you were to look back on your kind of journey in the world of archiving and or preservation too, what would you, if you were giving unsolicited advice to your past self or to somebody else, what would that be in the realm of starting up a digital or online archive or collection, or starting preservation work for the work that your organization does? It's a tough one.
I mean, I think from, because I wasn't with DSC at the beginning. So, I mean, it's easy for me to like point fingers and say, well, this is what we did wrong and this is what, but I think probably really getting a clear sense of like what it is you are collecting and what it is you're not collecting, because stuff is difficult to deal with and it's expensive to house. And I think you want to be able to save anything that might have any sort of educational or emotional value, but at the same time, I think there are moments when you end up in situations where you're taking things on and bringing things in that maybe don't have a space. I mean, kind of in the way that your organization collects. And I think early on, having a real clear sense of this is what we are collecting and this is what we're not. And if we find something that we're not collecting, this is where it could go, or this is what you could do with it. And then the other things I think is just being really clear about rights and intellectual property, and then at any point possible paying people honoraria and figuring out ways to put money in people's pockets, I think is huge, because I think then when tying back to trust building, that goes a really long way.
I'll agree with everything Jonah just said.
Love it. And Chelsea looks like she's agreeing as well too. I just want to encourage folks too, if you have a question, to enter those in the Q&A box. We're wrapping up on time here, so I'm going to get to some of the questions that we've had through the program as well. So this was during your presentation, Brian, but from Hannah, she's wondering, how have you managed ADA compliance requirements for online digital archives? And Chelsea and Jonah, feel free to chime in too if you have some knowledge about it.
I would say we've done a poor job, to be honest. I've mentioned that the text search. So our digital collection site, as it's configured at the moment, if we put a text document, first of all, we can't put like a PDF and have that text being searchable. So that's a big problem for the archive. And if we put up an image of a page, you can read I mean, that's only helpful for sighted folks, right? So then we have to do all the transcription work to make that available for screen readers and things. So there are a number of deficiencies, including, and that sort of make the material harder to use, not only for sighted folks, but also for ADA compliance that we're looking to address in some future changes. So I will say that we're not doing a very good job of that at the moment.
Thanks. Chelsea or Jonah, any thoughts on ADA or accessibility?
Only to say that one of many considerations that we're keeping in mind as we think about equity and accessibility as we kind of build out the system that we ultimately will use. So.
Great. Another question from Desiree for Jonah about how did you set up a digital format that could grow with your collection and be usable in the long haul? Any kind of insights to the process there of?
Well, we are actively building that. I think as a part of this next 2-year phase, we are, because our digital repository up until now is essentially spreadsheets and external hard drives and Google Drive. And so now as a part of this, and this kind of goes to the now we're ready to grow up phase of things where we're going to be building a full-scale digital repository. And I think I've personally in my own work, I've built I've been a part of content management systems being built before. But I kind of really understand the importance of it just has to be scalable, and you have to try to anticipate as many of the questions as possible before it happens. And I think in some ways, I mean, I'm not an expert here, but just in some ways, it's just about making sure that you can add things when you need to, and setting up systems where you don't want to decide on a system and then a couple of years from there realize that that was the wrong decision. Setting up a system where changes are acceptable and okay. But I think to answer that question, we are in the process of figuring exactly that question out, kind of for long-term preservation.
Great. And then last quick question too, before we have Yen show her time lapse of what she's been working on, and welcome my colleague Penny Maria to close out the program. Very quickly, what keeps you hopeful for the future of the arts and cultural sector as it relates to digital and preservation and digital archiving and collections at large? I mean, that's a big question, of course, but what's keeping you hopeful, whether it be very specific or whether it be more conceptual in general? Fire away.
Honestly, so I'll go first because the thing that keeps me hopeful and going is what the MDPN is trying to do, which is to focus on community building and resource sharing to make a lot of these, technically difficult and expensive processes accessible to a lot of organizations who haven't really had access to digital preservation before. And so that to me is really what keeps me going.
I'll throw in again for MDPN, having been involved to some extent with the prior Stepping Stone project. Trying to create a community-based sort of statewide preservation network has been something that's been talked about since I entered the profession, 10 years ago, and it's really exciting to see it getting to the point where there's actually something where we can place a file, and that the network actually exists. And I think that's really exciting, not only for smaller organizations, but also for places like the Henry Ford. So I'm really excited by that.
And I mean, I'll just chime in something maybe more conceptual and broader. But I think the world is, everybody, whether they know it or not, is being connected to digital archiving through all social media and everything on your computers and everything. And that's not to say anybody knows what to do with it. I just think the language and the framework of it is not as foreign as I think people think it is. And I think probably setting up the tools and the educational frameworks to help kids and everybody make sense of it, I hope that allows for potentially a more just a future in which people's legacy and archive can be a little more put together.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. And Penny Maria, over to you while Yen shows us her time lapse of the graphic recording.
Yes, well, thank you to everyone, to the panelists for being here, to all of our attendees for joining us, and to Adam for such thoughtful curation on such an important topic. Personally, as a musical theater fan, I'm reminded of the song Who Tells Your Story from Hamilton. So just again, connecting that art and culture scene with the technicalities of these processes we've been learning about today. As a reminder, please register for our next digital access for the arts program on March 18th, which will cover arts education and online instruction. And then also, thank you to Yin for this beautiful work of capturing everything we've discussed today so well. We're going to drop a link in the chat so that you can also learn more about Yin's work. Thank you for being here with us, everyone. And Adam, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sweet. Thanks, Penny Maria. Enjoy that sunshine that you're getting over there that we're all just super envious of. But yeah, everybody stick with us till the end of this time lapse, because I mean, it's just great to see the actual conversation mapped out. I'm sure. I mean, I always feel grateful when I get to see Yen's graphic recordings after this, because it makes me feel like something happened and we talked about things and here's the document to it, and it's not just notes in a Google Doc. And you know, I think we all forget our Zoom calls after a while, and I sure forget our programs too. So it's a really nice way to actually remember and have something that's more than just a recording. Thanks again to Jonah, Brian, and Chelsea. Feel free to check out more about their work from all the links in the chat. This recording will be available and you'll get it via email sometime probably Monday next week. And feel free to reach out to any of our panelists with any questions you have about the work. I am, as you can tell, completely new to the topic of digital archiving, preservation, and collections. And all three of our panelists have been really, really helpful in helping me understand what they're going to present on and their work, and have been really gracious in joining us today too. So huge shout out to all of them, and thanks for tuning in, everybody. That's the end of the time lapse. That's the end of the program. Thanks, Yen. Take care.